This is Digby Jeffson, but we called him something else in cricket. He was known as the Lobster. He was a batting all-rounder and captain for Surrey, who when he played was one of the biggest teams in the world. His batting was fine, really good in fact, but it's his bowling here that needs mentioning, because he averaged 25 with the ball, taking around a wicket and a half per game and finishing up with almost 300 first-class victims. This is a quality cricketer. And when he started out, he was a batter who bowled fairly fast, but over time he developed into a different kind of bowler, lob bowling. I mean, look at this again. This is not a normal position for a bowler to be in. He's lobbing the ball up high from a low height and then dropping it down around near the stumps. As you might be aware, this is not how we bowl now. But Jeffson was bowling like this into the 1900s for Surrey. So he bowled underarm lobs for one of the biggest cricket teams in the world at that time in the same century as Wasim Akram bowled 90-mile-an-hour left-arm reverse swing for Pakistan. Cricket has changed a lot.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
I'm not sure we know exactly who was the first major freelance T20 cricketer. My memory suggests that perhaps it was someone like Dirk Nannes. He wasn't really developed by Australia, was a late bloomer, played international cricket for more than one nation, and as a proper left-arm quick, he was massively in demand in T20 cricket. Even if he was one of the first T20 freelance players, he certainly wasn't one of cricket's first freelancers. Cricket has been hiring freelance players for generations, well before international cricket, let alone international sport, even existed. Julian Khan was buying international players before World War II from New Zealand and South Africa. The great Sydney Barnes played club cricket because it paid more than playing for England or a county. And a lot of the West Indian cricketers play club or first class cricket around the globe as well. Also, Kerry Packer came into the sport to buy cricketers from around the world so he could essentially make cheap Australian-made TV for his network. There's also rebel leagues and just county cricketers paying players. When nation versus nation becomes a major thing in cricket, some players do decide to play for their country, but others leave just to improve their standard of living or to make money from their profession. And outside of complete hardcore nationalists, I don't think many people would actually expect them to work at a fraction of the price of what is an incredibly short career. But for us, and I'm saying almost everyone probably watching this video, we have grown up in the international cricket world. We see things a little bit different. Before World War II, county cricket was really the biggest form of cricket, and really had been since counties started playing cricket. Before that, it was regional teams, or even teams owned by just one person. That sounds familiar. Nations being the best form of cricket by cricket standards is actually a relatively new concept. And there were always problems from the start with the idea of international cricket. Trying to convince someone else to tour you so that you can make money is not an ideal way of going about things. And none of this is new. The difference now is that private money is in cricket and the boards have been left behind, and their only options is to turn to outside money, which maintains their existences but obviously weakens their importance and obviously now their national teams. There are two ways of looking at this. So what could the national boards have done to have stopped this from happening? The most obvious one would have been creating an international league, and I talk about this a lot, but many people in cricket have discussed this over the last 10 or 15 years. Not things that we call leagues in cricket or championships, which are just tournaments on top of an existing bilateral structure. We're talking about a proper international test championship that is programmed correctly, that is sold as one package, which is kind of the most important thing, and that the hosting fees and players' wages are actually part of that package, meaning that players from all nations would be paid a set percentage of the broadcast deal. And for that, we would obviously need probably some form of promotion and relegation, and maybe fewer teams in Division 1 and more teams in, say, Division 2 or Division 3. Why do we not have this? The teams who thought they might end up in Division 2 didn't want it. Not all teams want to play each other all the time because they want to make more money as well. The rich teams fought it and the poor teams fought it. And as far as I can tell, there was no boards who were ever that happy to let the ICC control what used to be bilateral series. So it means that when it comes to nation versus nation contests, almost everything in cricket is undersold, which, considering that was the majority of the major forms of cricket in the world, that's a bit of a flaw of the system. And of course, it's not just Test cricket. We could have done the exact same thing with ODI and T20 internationals. This year we weirdly had Ireland and the Netherlands finally playing the amount of cricket that major nations play. But almost as soon as it began, the one-day Super League was gone, cancelled before it was even finished. So we knew that making a league of international cricket was something that could have saved it. But none of the boards wanted to do that because they would either lose a little bit of money, although probably not, but they would lose a lot of power. Turns out that they were going to lose power anyway. There were even things we could have done with the T20 leagues. The IPL was obviously going to take up a lot of time, and it will eventually be a full-time tournament over 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 months of the year in all probability. But that will probably take a long time to happen. And so in the meantime, there was actually plenty that could have been done with the calendar. For instance, we could have just given everyone franchise windows. Depending on your location, you could have been given a time slot where you had to play your local tournament, allowing for plenty of time for internationals. But no one wanted to do that because they didn't want to compete against other leagues. It's a weird thing about cricket, and you think about it with Test cricket as well. Once you get Test status, you could never lose it. It's like no one actually wants to compete in cricket. But there was another option in the first few years. Once it was clear that every nation was going to try a league, and bearing in mind that cricket has always been an international sport, there could have been multi-nation leagues. Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa could have hosted a 14-team league with special access given to players from, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. A Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan tournament could have existed as well. A European league, a West Indian, United States, and Canada kind of North American league. These would have been hard to pull off, but cricket has done things like this before. And realistically, from a market perspective, it means that you no longer have a tiny market. You have a lot more people to sell to. Instead, everyone had their own tournament, and most of them are basically useless. They don't make any money, and they clutter up the entire fixture list. A lot of smaller ones exist for nothing more than, let's be honest, money laundering, betting rights, and probably outright corruption. But they still pay, and it means that for players from smaller nations, they can make a good living outside of international cricket. And these are just things that I've talked about a lot over the years, but I'm sure there are many other ways of safeguarding international cricket if that's what they wanted to do. But because there is no one group who actually makes money from international games outside the ICC with their individual tournaments, there's no one in charge. Everything is bilateral, everything is agreements, and everything is people trying to get as much as they can from the system that exists. No one in cricket has actually ever banded together to make a better system. And so the ICC keep cramming new events into the calendar at the same time that other cricket boards kept putting more internationals into their calendar as well. Because cricket is completely rudderless. Even if the ICC were to make a suggestion, no one actually has to listen to them. And the promised money from the local T20 tournaments never came. Only the IPL can make proper money from their league. And the other boards don't have the market, which is by far the most important thing, or in some cases even the skills to make their leagues bigger. So it was inevitable that the IPL would expand and the other leagues would become less relevant. LinkedIn is part of my online writing course because there are so many cricketers and coaches that are on there. But even outside of that, me and a fellow journalist used to play a game with LinkedIn where we tried to guess what job a former Shield player may have based on their playing style. Surprisingly, we were often wrong. You, however, can use LinkedIn for far more important reasons, like creating a job post in minutes. Add the hashtag hiring and off you go. You can try screening questions to find people with the right skills and experiences, because if you're a small business, well, LinkedIn is a large pond. So don't use this terrific platform to see what Graham Vimpani is up to since he's 100 against the West Indies. Instead, visit linkedin.com/Inca, as in Inca, the back half of my podcast, Red Inca, and you can post a job ad for free. Terms and conditions to apply. Because the franchise T20 model makes far more sense in international cricket. No matter how much you rinse your international players, there's only so much cricket you can host at home. And the key thing you can't do is have a game on every night throughout your summer. You can do this with franchise T20 leagues, and that is what boards are chasing. Weirdly enough, we don't talk about this a lot, but international games still usually make a lot more money than a league match. But you can only play a fraction of them, and you are still reliant on other cricket boards. And one thing I have learnt from covering global cricket for a very long time is that no boards trust each other. In fact, they openly despise each other is probably the better term. Many of the leads I got when covering cricket politics were from another board. Even in the middle of the big three negotiations of those three boards coming together, I had an EDB person briefing me against Cricket Australia and the BCCI. So while many of us sit around and think, why don't they just come together and fix the game? You need to know that they never really wanted to come together in the first place. And they are beset by short-term thinking and trying to get as much as you can from your mob as possible. And that has led us to where we are right now. And so you can certainly see why these boards all thought franchises were a goldmine. But they just aren't. And so we're left with different kinds of T20 leagues. The IPL is on its own, the pinnacle, the biggest thing in the sport. The next tier is the decent local leagues that still have a fairly good market. The PSL and Big Bash are the two here, with the 100 and probably Major League Cricket chances of joining them. Then you have the small locals. Bangladesh actually once threatened to be in that tier above, but now they're down with New Zealand and Sri Lanka. They'll continue to exist because there is still enough TV audience at home to sustain a league, but just not enough money to always keep their best players happy. And these leagues are very ripe to just become feeder leagues for the IPL. That's essentially what the CPL has already become, and now this new league in South Africa is looking at doing the same thing. Even the major league in America has some IPL owners, but because their market is so big, maybe they can get a little bit lucky with that. In fact, in Major League Cricket, they have raised more money in a short period of time than most of the other leagues combined have ever made. Then there are the leagues who exist to sell betting rights and perhaps to prop up an associate nation, or because of some other kind of nefarious reason, or just because someone wants to run a league. Most of them probably won't stay around, or they'll be rebranded a bunch of times, or they will struggle. And I think all this is worth remembering, because it isn't that all these leagues are big and functioning and destroying international cricket. It's kind of that one is. T20 and franchise leagues haven't taken over. The IPL has, because it has a great market and it worked out how to fully exploit that. But even the IPL owners were kind of slow to this. Outside of Rajasthan, who actually tried to do what KKR and MI are currently doing, almost 12 years ago, the IPL owners weren't exactly quick moving either. It might look odd to suddenly look up and see everything named as Mumbai Indians, but this has been coming for a very long time. And if the IPL owners had been a little bit more bullish early on, we already would have been here 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years ago. And being that Rajasthan had already showed what was going to happen, again, the cricket boards did very little to stop that. Oh, and I haven't mentioned one kind of T20 league, which partly because it's never really quite existed correctly, but it was the sort of league that when anyone said, what would you invent? This is what I would say. Essentially a franchise where you don't have a limit on overseas players. How this would work without a local market, we don't know yet, because all of our T20 leagues actually play to the local market first. But having all these overseas players allows a smaller tournament to be much bigger if looked after correctly. The problem, of course, with this kind of league is if you're a major nation, and for a major nation, this is a hard thing to sell to your local audience, that you're not going to have as many players from your nation involved. So that's why a league like this was always going to happen in somewhere like Canada or the UAE. And the UAE makes more sense because it's a better time zone for India. But this is about the fourth attempt to actually get a tournament like this up in the UAE. It has better owners this time and more money, so this one will probably stick for a while. But step one is setting the league up. Step two is getting the players. And the problem is when you're opening up for more overseas players, it means you're actually taking the best players away from their local leagues. And this is why there are quite a few cricket boards around the world not particularly happy with this new ILT20 league. Cricket Australia have got around this in the short term by offering David Warner a marketing contract, but they probably can't afford to do that for everyone. So they will probably lose local players. But in the short term, they'll also lose big name internationals. The same goes for the BPL and the Super Smash in New Zealand. There is also the new Cricket South Africa T20 League, which looks even more organised than what we're seeing in Dubai. So there's going to be even more international players needed at the same time. That means in the height of the Southern Hemisphere summer, there are going to be 5 T20 franchise tournaments, all overlapping in different directions, and probably at least 4 of those looking to get major overseas talent. Not to mention that PSL overlaps with some of this as well. The Southern Summer is now a feeding frenzy for the best players. And the Southern Summer used to be when we saw the most international cricket crammed into a small period. So how that whole thing plays out with 2 new huge tournaments starting, I don't even know. But when you look at cricket with a wider lens, I think the most obvious thing is, and you could have said this quite a while ago, is to pare back on international cricket. But looking at the new Future Tours program, we're actually increasing the number of matches. That is because these leagues aren't making that much money, and so they also need to play as much international cricket as they can. The only answer that cricket boards seem to ever have is more cricket. And so we are breaking the international model, but at the same time we're also breaking the system of local domestic leagues. Yay cricket, a wicket at both ends. And so more and more cricket is now around that one model, the IPL, and everything else working towards it and feeding it. There are roughly 4,000 professional men's cricketers in the world at the moment. And there's also more than enough for all the cricket we are currently playing. There are more than enough to go around for all these leagues, and there are more than enough for all the cricket we are playing, including internationals. But then the IPL owners directly get involved here. Because all of this brings us to Trent Boult. You might be wondering why it has taken this long to have so many Trent Boult situations. And that actually goes back to the other left-arm seamer I was talking about before, Dirk Nannes. Being a freelancer in cricket is not an ideal situation. Training, coaching, injury management are now all on you. And more importantly, some of these leagues don't pay for months or at all. There is no protection, and if your form drops even in one series, you might miss out on the next couple. Why Boult is different is because he represents what will probably happen in the future. Signing with a major IPL franchise and then also representing them in South Africa, UAE, CPL and Major League Cricket at their will. And then those cricketers will be like basketballers or footballers, well, they'll have to ask for permission to play for their nation. It should be pointed out that while everyone is flipping out about Trent Boult, that's essentially what already happens with associate players in county cricket. But more and more what we will see is that for many players, their main team will become their franchise, and their national side they will represent at World Cups, maybe Olympics, perhaps Commonwealth Games, and for key series if they get permission. That isn't really the freelance cricketer that everyone was worried about. It's actually just replacing the national contract with a franchise one. But of course, to most fans who grew up, it won't feel like that. It's going to feel like a lot more. But the truth is that cricket saw this coming and couldn't come together to do anything about it. There was a lot of hot air, but almost no tangible action that could have stopped it from 2008 through to now. Trent Boult was not the canary in the coal mine. We've lost hundreds of canaries along the way here. Literally for 200 years we've had canaries. And in this particular analogy, the boards literally opened up the mines and just allowed people to come in and take their best natural resources away. In some ways, it's actually shocking that the IPL owners took this long to do this when the market inefficiencies were so obvious to see and had always been in cricket. And so the game will change again, just as it always has and will. And it will be rough for anyone who loves international cricket way more than franchise cricket over the next few years. And I do think many older cricket fans will probably move on from the sport. But there will be more professional cricketers, probably from more cricket nations than ever before. There'll be more cricket fans as well. There'll be more cricket to watch, and probably also more shirts to own. And if cricket didn't change, there would still be Digby Jeffsons out there bowling underarm. And we wouldn't care about this more as much as it has. It had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future by new nations, incredible athletes, devious strategies, all sorts of things that kept moving our game further. And if you have ever loved cricket even for a moment, it is because it has always changed and never stayed the same. And cricket has always been one thing, a representation of the society it came from. Digby was a gentleman of privilege who tossed the ball up in the air without any real athleticism. I'm sorry, but give me Rashid Khan's wrong ends in whatever shirt he chooses to wear that day.